tax.
Was there any redeeming feature of Budget 2019 that Warren Ingram has found to be remotely palatable? Personal Finance brought to you by RMB. Join RMB Private Bank and experience solutionist thinking. Warren Ingram, is there any redeeming feature in the budget?
I think the most important one for me is that we didn't see a big jump in what I would call wealth taxes. I felt the last few years up until this one that we'd seen a really for me, quite accelerated growth in my view, wealth taxes. So almost to the point where by the end of the last budget, I felt we'd got to the point of a punitive tax regime for people that are generating growth in South Africa. In other words, state duties had gone, I think, too far. Income tax certainly had gone too high, and things like dividends tax just going continuously increasing all the time. And I felt that that it had got to the point, I still feel that, where people who create businesses in South Africa and therefore might have the opportunity to create wealth are actually actively disincentivized from doing that. The tax regime is where we are today.
And also there was an under-collection of taxes, and I wonder if the National Treasury has realized that they squeezed the lemon and then the pips squeaked and there was no juice left, and so then they got the scraper and then scraped out the remaining pulp in the lemon and then still try to get more juice out of it, and the taxpayer is that lemon and it's
done. And I think also there must be a point, and I think we're there. I think we're right on that tipping point where where you find an incentive to create people, or create an incentive for people to stop paying tax legally. And I think we must be really close to that. And I'm not talking about from a corruption point of view, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is taxes become so high that eventually the more rational, the more legal, the more ethical individual starts to say to themselves that financially it actually will pay me to now find ways to stop paying tax. And that's a terrible state to be in. So not only then do you have all the questions about corruption, et cetera, but then you have this incentivization.
And there's a fundamental, you can't keep raising taxes in an environment that is corrupt. You can't keep raising taxes in an environment where legitimate taxpayers, people who have been paying their tax, 6 million people who've been paying their taxes on a regular basis, go, hold on a second, but if SARS just collected what was due from people who are dodging, and if we stop the corruption, there'd be no need for tax increases. You could actually start cutting taxes. If you cut the fat in government, you could actually provide an incentive to people to pay more tax at a lower rate. Because they would see some growth.
Absolutely. And I'm by no means a budget watcher, and certainly I've never tried to give a forecast on what will happen in the next budget. But that would be what I would really hope for, is that this was the signal that those tax rates have peaked clearly. And I can understand that they can't start to give tax breaks now. The country desperately needs every cent it can get. But if we do see some kind of, extra economic growth, that we start to incentivize business again, and the people who are putting money into the country to create jobs, that they get an incentive to that by reducing the taxes that they pay. And if you just think about it, about what tax rates the maximum taxpayers are paying now. So someone who starts a business, who then is successful in launching that business, employing a lot of people, they're paying 45% on income. Then they're paying a dividends withholdings tax. And forget about VAT and all the other things. They are way through 65% of what they generate. They are paying away in tax. And that's just not an incentive.
For zero return, other than sleeping peacefully at night because money is going to keeping the wolf at bay in terms of paying for social grants and that sort of stuff. People employ, on top of that, employing the private security, going to the private schools, going to the private hospitals. It's the curse of I use curse reservedly, of being rich in a country like South Africa, where you don't get bang for your buck as the taxpayer. That money is so desperately needed to support people who can't afford to live.
And truthfully, giving incentives. They're always talking about now. It's great lip service all the time. We need to incentivize small business. We need to create small business. Well, you're doing nothing to give the people who deploy their capital in small business an incentive to do that. There's no incentive now. You can talk about 12J and we can talk about that forever. And I probably won't agree with a lot of the punters of 12Js that that's the scheme. But the simplest way is make it profitable for people to do so, and they will do it. And I believe firmly that the average South African who's involved in business, who wants to get going, is not a crook. They will pay their taxes. They'll gladly pay tax, what they believe is fair. And that's the question now, is are we in a state of unfairness? Is it now an unequal playing field? And then just quickly, I don't think there were big signals in what they were talking about. So there were two little things that kind of came up about what they're discussing. The one is around regularizing the treatment of provident funds versus pension and RAs, and it's just about a lump sum tax. It's quite a technical thing, not a big issue at all. And then something that we've spoken about before, which is they are going to investigate this tax on foreign, people who are working abroad, so not foreigners, but people who are working abroad for a period of time, and making sure that tax is implemented correctly. What they did say is they're taking feedback on that. So I'm really glad that they're taking feedback. I hope they listen to it and implement it correctly. But for me, that was the kind of the only real things that I saw in the budget that relate to us from a personal finance point of view.
And the fact is, we're not seeing any major tax increases. You get in real terms, you'll pay more tax because you're not getting the inflationary benefit of a tax bracket creep. So you're not getting that benefit. But we're not seeing sort of a nasty VAT shock or a nasty income tax shock or a nasty extra sugar tax. There is the carbon tax which is coming in, which is going to over time accumulate and add to the cost of fuel, for example.
And I don't know if you remember, but I remember when the fuel levy first came in, that tax on fuel, it was by Trevor Manuel, I think, and apparently it was a temporary tax.
There's no such thing as a temporary tax.
And look at us now, and I just think that's the point here. I mean, one of the things I would hope for as an investor and a person that talks around investments is that they for example look at reducing dividends tax at a point in time, and that's not a wealth tax. I mean, I think we need to understand the bulk of people who own shares in this country are the people that are earning normal salaries, not the wealthy people, and they're the ones that are being prejudiced by this tax as well. So if you want to encourage investments in companies that are growing the economy, growing employment, then give capital and give people who have some money the incentive to do that.
I feel we may be some way away from that. It's an ideological discussion, not a logical discussion. Warren Ingram, thank you. Personal finance advisor, executive director at Galileo Capital, as always, on a Thursday night.